Joe Biden had run on an enormous platform that included at the top of it help for COVID relief. He said this was Trump's biggest failing of the past 4 years, and he was going to change things, turn the economy around, get vaccines out, get schools reopened, get the economy humming, XYZ, everything that he was promising on the campaign trail, he is trying to do now in a very condensed period of time. And so he had unveiled, even before he was sworn in, he had unveiled a $1.9 trillion plan that includes a lot of the things that Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats had passed last May in their HEROES Act. So that was unemployment benefits. It was another big direct check to individuals and families. It was reopening schools. It was vaccines. It was small businesses. It was medical equipment. It was state and local government funding, which was a big sticking point with the Republicans. So all of that stuff is in Biden's plan. The problem, that is the practical, the meat of his proposal. And what happened yesterday at the White House was a group of 10 Republican senators met with him with a counter proposal. They have a $618 billion proposal that includes a lot of those same elements, just on a smaller scale. So, for example, the stimulus checks, instead of being $1,400 as in Biden's plan, would be $1,000. And the eligibility would be squeezed such that instead of an income eligibility up to $99,000, it would be only $50,000. So it's targeting a much lower income bracket. There's certainly an economic case to be made for that, but Biden's plan is more generous, and it seems like he's going to stick with it. Now, he's sort of in a bind because, of course, after 4 years of a very divisive President Trump, Biden also ran on a platform of unifying the country. And so he is under an awful lot of pressure to come to the table with these Republicans, work on some kind of compromise, even something as big as COVID relief, which was his big platform issue. He wants to be seen as reaching across the aisle and making these bipartisan gestures. That being said, the Republicans' plan is so small, it's less than a third of what he wants. And so what you're going to see this week is the Democrats are going to stick with the Biden plan. They're going to stick with the $1.9 trillion. They're going to say, thank you very much, Republicans. Your plan is wonderful, but it doesn't meet the needs of the country at this moment. You're still having unemployment at almost 1 million new filings per week. So there is this discrepancy between a soaring stock market and a terrible kind of retail market and a terrible jobs picture. And so Democrats are going to stick with the 1.9 trillion. And so this week, Chuck Schumer actually just went to the floor this morning. He and Pelosi had unveiled their budget resolution yesterday, and they are trying to jam that through both the House and the Senate this week. The Senate's going to vote this afternoon to get that process started. Senate, of course, moves much more slowly than the House does, so that's going to set in motion a series of votes in the Senate. The House is expected to pass this budget resolution on Wednesday, and then the Senate's going to do something called a vote-a-rama, which is a whole bunch of amendments, hours of debate on the floor. Any changes would go back to the House. They would pass it again, and they're hoping to do it by the end of the week. But the significant thing about their budget resolution is it contains something called reconciliation. And the reason that is important is because reconciliation is an instruction. It's a procedural instruction that says that for this piece of legislation, in this case, the COVID stimulus, you do not need 60 votes in the Senate. And that means that the Democrats could pass the bill without any Republican support. And that's a huge deal because they avoid the filibuster, and they could pass Biden's $1.9 trillion bill, get a big victory in the first couple weeks of the Biden administration, and then move on to more bipartisan things in the future.
This new Hill poll data really showcases how people still believe that there needs to be more federal spending to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. And most of that is really focused on measures that would help individual Americans. The most popular aspect, of course, is stimulus checks to individuals. That's sort of followed closely by aid to small businesses and money for expanded testing and sort of dealing with the direct effects of the pandemic. And then everything else is sort of further down the list. So unemployment, rent and mortgage relief, extending the moratorium on foreclosures, aid for state and local governments are all sort of in that third tier of items. And I think it's really interesting because you see that pattern sort of holds up pretty consistently across sort of all the demographic groups. Of course, Republicans have some slightly different priorities, a little bit more support for money to go to businesses, a little bit less for state governments and for student debt relief. But all in all, it does really clearly sort of lay out the idea of getting that stimulus check remains very popular with the American public. Republican elected officials are maybe a little further away from their base in terms of what people actually want. There's a lot of Americans who are still struggling, still really having a hard time dealing with the pandemic. And additional relief is something that a lot of people would benefit from. So I think we see that, specifically in the Republican responses to this poll where half of Republicans support as one of their priorities aid for small business, almost half as well providing stimulus checks. So, we can see there is still a lot of support, even on the Republican side, for these various measures. And I think one of the things that's particularly transparent for me is we also see there's this one item: there should not be any more coronavirus relief. Very few Americans select that option, 7% overall. And among Republicans, it's only 12%. So it's, there is no groundswell of Republicans saying, oh, no, we shouldn't do this. I think the appetite for additional support is there. And I think the Biden administration is pushing to sort of get as much into people's hands as possible, which I think has a bigger long-term impact, politically speaking, than any sort of comments about bipartisanship or sort of, I think Americans sort of don't care so much about the process as the results.